it today. Before we go any further, I'd like for Keith Davis, if you would, to lead our minds in prayer.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to gather together and study from your word. Pray, Father, that our study will be beneficial, useful to us as we endeavor to serve thee. Be with David as he presents the lesson. Pray, Father, we give him the recollection of all that he has studied. We pray that we can use what we learn here today to be a better servant for thee, to do your will. We thank you for your Son Jesus, the love and the shedding of the Calvary's cross and dying for us. It's through his name we pray.
So I think what we're going to find in this next section that Peter is not going to mince any words about the problems with false teachers, and the Greek writing was probably a little bit more colorful, maybe we'd say, than it is in the English. But there's no question that he has nothing but contempt for false teachers. And I think he recognized even then the problems that false teachers could cause in the church, and that we always need to constantly be on the lookout for the things that false teachers do. So let's start out at verse 12. And it says, "But these, as creatures without reason, born mere animals to be taken and destroyed, railing in matters whereof they are ignorant, shall in their destroying surely be destroyed." So, we talked last week a little bit about angels. And, we know from, the writings in the Bible that, angels have fallen, and, God had a terrible fate for the angels that fell. So, the fallen angels recognized the moral law of God, and when they broke the moral law of God, they felt the wrath that came upon them for their disobedience. And these false teachers are going to be in the same boat that these angels are, because really these false teachers, they were inferior to the angels, and we talked about that a little bit back in verse 11. And they were like mere animals, and then basically disregarding any laws of any type of authority or higher world. Animals don't have a whole lot of respect for laws. There's a law against dogs biting people. Well, dogs don't pay a whole lot of attention to that sometimes, and they go on and they bite people. And he's kind of compared them here to wild beasts of prey, and they solely exist for their gratification of their fleshly appetites that these false teachers have, and eventually they're going to be taken and they're going to be destroyed for the harm that they caused. And these false teachers are pretty much similar creatures. They don't have any reason. They're not using rational conduct, and they're going to pretty much get the same fate as like we would take an animal who is uncontrollable, who bites a lot of people, do things along that line. You get an animal like that, eventually have to put him down, not because it's just a thing that has to be done. And this is the same thing that's going to happen to these false teachers. They're going to get a similar fate. So they've got this senseless railing against the matters which they really didn't know anything about. It's almost like they're going to be making these things up as they go along, and eventually it's going to catch up with them, and they're going to suffer. They're going to suffer destruction. The problem is not only are they going to suffer destruction, but the ones that they have deceived are going to receive destruction also, because they followed these false teachers. So when they're destroying others, they're destroying themselves, and they're destroying others that will eventually be go down the tube with them. So wild beasts are made to take and destroy by man. Man has dominion over the animals, and God has dominion over man. So it's kind of the same relationship, and they're going to get and receive the destruction that they deserve because of the things that they have done and the false teaching and the leading astray that they did. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 13. Suffering wrong as the hire of wrongdoing, men that count it pleasure to revel in the daytime, spots and blemishes, reveling in their deceiving while they feast with you. So these words are construed with the final clause of the verse that these false teachers, they shall in their destruction be surely destroyed, and because of the things that they've done. Now the King James Version rendering based on a well-supported variation of the Greek text, and in the Greek it kind of says, and shall receive the reward of unrighteousness. The false teachers are going to get the same reward as the ones who are unrighteous. And, they think that they're holy, but in the sight of God, they're unrighteous, and they're going to receive the same reward. So we all know that, the reward of unrighteousness is ruin and final destruction. And there are plenty of examples in the Bible of ones who receive this reward of the unrighteous, pretty much in this life. They, things happen to them in this life that it's bad enough in this life, but it's going to be worse in the judgment. And these false teachers are pretty much, being put in the same category as Balaam, which we, is talked about a lot in Numbers 31, 8, and 19, and also Judas. Judas is not a person in the Bible who people hold up as an example of Christianity. Even though he was one of the apostles, he ended up, with a pretty bad fate. He ended up going out and hanging himself. He went out and did something stupid. And it's like Katie says, you play stupid games, you get stupid prizes. And, Judas was, pretty much the same thing. He did something that he shouldn't have done, and he's going to receive the reward of the unrighteous. So ordinarily, even the wicked confine their excesses to doing things at night. If you're going to break into a house or you're going to go steal something, it's usually not a very good idea to do it in the daytime. Thieves try to pretty much work at night. But here he talks about they're doing it in the daytime. They don't think anything about it. They think they're doing the right thing. They're deceiving people, and it's right out there in the open for everybody to see. They're not trying to hide the things that they're doing. They're doing it right out in the open. So they were just pretty much abandoned to sin, and they didn't care anything about it. It was all right out there in the open, and they were finding pleasure in this, in what they were doing, and they were pretty much unrestrained in the indulgence that they were doing. Paul talks about this a little bit in 1 Thessalonians 5 and 7, pretty much the same thought, that they were ceaselessly and unrestrained in the things that they were doing. So the apostle had dealt with the insubordination and the disrespect of authority characteristics of these false teachers. With this verse, he begins a description of their abandonment in sin. I mean, Peter here is really giving us a strong message of how important it is to look for these false teachers and be sure that we don't let them in our midst and ruin our souls and ruin congregations and things along that line. So we see here that they were full of spots and blemishes, with the contrast to Jesus, who was a lamb without spot or blemish. He talked about that in 1 Peter 1 and 19. And his body was without spot, and it was, he lived a pure life, in contrast to the way that these false teachers were doing things. And these teachers had injected themselves pretty much into all of the things that the Christian community did at that time. And from what I understand, you know, the Christians had a lot of fellowship dinners together. And we're not talking about the Lord's Supper. We're talking about just, you know, regular meals. They enjoyed each other's company. And these false teachers would come in there, and you know there was a great group right there where they could come in and deceive. So this gave them additional opportunities at these additional functions to deceive the people and spread their false gospel. Comments about that verse?
I don't see here any distinction between those who teach error for greed, for gain, you know, like the Joel Osteen,
Right.
as those who stand up here and maybe just teach error because they don't know any better.
Out of ignorance.
It doesn't differentiate between them. You know, it's odd that they would throw them all into false teachers.
Well, but if you look at it though, it gives you the same result. And I think that God is very result oriented. He wants a particular result, and if it's not the result He wants, how you get there is, you know, not any. There's a lot of ways to do it. I get that's a good point. Any other comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 14. Having eyes full of adultery, and that cannot cease from sin, enticing unsteadfast souls, having a heart exercised in covetousness, children of cursing. So having full eye of adultery is in the Greek translation, it's a translation of having eyes full of an adulteress. So, this is somebody and this is really a pretty vivid description of a man who is unable to look upon a woman without regarding her as an object of lasciviousness. And, you know, this goes back to, you know, to the mindset that these false teachers had is, I mean, this completely consumed their mind, and they were constantly thinking every time they got the opportunity of, you know, distorting the gospel, they were right there to do it. And it's a disposition of the heart here which violates, you know, the things of the Lord. In Matthew 5:27 and 28, it says, "Ye have heard that it was said, Thou shalt commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone that looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart." This is the same thing in the preaching realm and the things that these people were teaching as somebody who is looking upon a woman to committed adultery with her. It's the same mindset that these teachers have that these adulterers and adulteresses have. So I mean, it's a pretty condemning thing that Peter is saying here. So the hearts of these false teachers, they were filled with lust, and they were always looking for an opportunity to gratify this lust. They were always there wanting to spread this false gospel and preach this false thing, not because they cared for the souls of the ones that they were talking to, but this was a thing that, you know, they were getting self-gratification out of the things that they were doing, and they were motivated, you know, by this, and as a result of this, they just couldn't help themselves, and they couldn't help, you know, and cease from sinning and doing the things that the problems that it was causing. Now, the word enticing that we see in this verse in the original Greek was a word that means a bait. It's like they're going out there fishing. You know, you put your worm on your hook, and the worm is the bait. Well, the bait in this case, obviously, is the false doctrine that these people are teaching. So the word occurs in verse 18 of this chapter, and is such a term as would be most familiar to Peter as a fisherman. He understands about bait. You know, anybody that's a good fisherman understands about bait. And, you know, you got to use the right kind of bait to catch the kind of fish that you want to do. I mean, this bait stuff can get pretty complicated, you know. So these false teachers, they knew exactly what to say in each different group to get the result that they wanted and get the gratification and get the result that they wanted. And this unsteadfast soul, deceived by their teachers, they suffer themselves to be entrapped by this bait. They get sucked in by the things that this false teacher is saying, and as a result of that, they're going to suffer the same destruction that these false teachers are. You know, the bait's out there dangling in front of them, and what happens is they take the bait. And for us, that means if the bait of false teachers are out there dangling, we got to be a smart fish, and we don't want to take the bait, because if we take the bait, and you know, it's like when a fish takes the bait, they get hooked. What happens to them? They get drug in, and you know, we eat them at Captain D's or something like that. So you know, that's the same type of destruction that that they would get into.
I think one of the most enticing doctrines today is Calvinism, because if all of those things are true, then I can live however I want. I'm totally afraid if I'm elected, and I really can't know if I'm elected, really. Doesn't matter what I do after I'm a Christian, and all of that. That's a very, even to me, in some sense, that sounds enticing. Hey, I can do what I want.
It's an easy way
It's
out.
a really easy way, and these guys don't put it out that way, saying you can do whatever you want, but those are the implications, so we gotta watch out for that kind of stuff.
And I think the thing that kind of goes along with that a little bit is they entice you with, well, you do all of this stuff and you're going to have lots of money. You know, they talk about, riches on earth and all these types of things, and I think that's a draw for a lot of people, and I've always thought that like these mega churches and stuff, if they were truly following the gospel, they wouldn't be a mega church. There wouldn't be this many people, because people wouldn't follow those things. And you do have to admit that most of these people that have these mega churches, they're a very dynamic speaker. They put on a good show. The things are entertaining, and it just you go there to be entertained and not to worship the Lord in the deal.
You can tell the way the pulpit's set up. It looks like it's theatrical stage.
Right. And they got their orchestra and their praise teams and all that stuff.
I
And
attended a wedding about a month ago up at the Christ Temple.
mhm.
And it's amazing, some of the places. It even has a bookstore and a coffee shop.
Oh yeah. Well, they got a gym out back.
And that's it.
Got a gym out back.
Crazy. Oh, they don't.
And we see the word exercised in this verse also, and basically this is a term that kind of in the Greek refers to training in a gymnasium. I guess that's why they've got a gymnasium there at the church, so they can do their training. So these teachers, they were training and trained in this habit of greed. They were working on this stuff. And here they styled children of cursing. And this is a Hebrew idiom that expressing character through sonship. And this is something that we see throughout the writing in the New Testament. In John 17 and 12, it talks about the son of perdition. In Ephesians 2 and 2, it talks about the sons of disobedience. In Mark 3 and 17, it talks about the sons of thunder. So this sonship is something that these Hebrew people especially would understand in the writing here of Peter. So they were children of cursing because they were a curse to all others, and would themselves suffer the curse of destruction in judgment. They were just, not only were they a curse to everybody else, but they were a curse to themselves, and they were going to receive, they were going to receive destruction in the end. Comments about that verse? All right, let's move on to verse 15. Forsaking the right way, they went astray, having followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the hire of wrongdoing. So the right way, obviously, is the way of truth. These people did not have the truth in them. They weren't following the way of truth. They were following their own lusts and desires. And it's vigorously designated, that we need to follow the way of the Lord, which in Romans 3 and 17 it refers to the truth as being the way of peace. In Proverbs in 4 and 11, the way of wisdom. In Proverbs again 10 and 17, the way of life. And in Acts 16 and 17, it talks about the way of salvation. So all of these things are kind of interchangeable, that if we're doing these things, we're following the truth, there's going to be peace, there's going to be salvation. All these things are interlinked, and it's a matter of who we follow and what we follow to get this. I think one of the important things is we need to follow the way of studying the Bible and knowing what's true and what's false. So the false teachers who Peter describes in this section of this epistle have forsaken the right way, and they had gone astray. And they were distorting the ways of God. There's a path that leads to heaven, and it's a straight path and it's a narrow path. And we've talked lots of times, there's a broad way that leads to destruction. But even on the straight path, every now and then there can be some side roads, and you got to stay off the side roads and stay on the main road, because sometimes if you get off the main road, you get stuck in the mud, because it's a gravel road, and you go out there and there's a big mud hole and you get your car stuck up. It's kind of the same deal. You can be going right down the straight and narrow, and all of a sudden turn off to the side and do something that could cost you your soul, because you varied off the path that you should have been following. So one cannot forsake a way which he has never been. If you stay on this straight and narrow and stay off of the other paths, then you're not going to be forsaking the word by staying on the path. But these had abandoned the doctrine of Christ, and they no longer conform to the life principles which is taught in the Bible. Of course, back then it was taught by the apostles and the ones who had the spiritual gifts. They were laying out what the principles were, and these principles were the principles that needed to be followed so that to lead to salvation. So the story of Balaam and his effort to curse the children of Israel is a reference to Numbers 22, 1 through 41. And Balaam desired the reward which the Moabite messenger brought here, called the hire of wrongdoing, because he hoped to receive money for the wicked work that he sought to do. We see here that he was looking for some type of earthly reward. And there are earthly rewards here on earth for being a Christian, but there's even better rewards in heaven for staying on the path and finishing the course. So these teachers whom Peter alludes to were like Balaam in that they prostituted the doctrine of Christ for personal gain, and they taught these doctrines that were contrary to the teachings of Jesus, the will of the Lord, because they loved the wages that they were getting for their unrighteousness. They liked the praise, they liked whatever other rewards that they were getting, and they were putting these rewards ahead of the things that they were getting from being a Christian. So the word followed here in the text is translated from a Greek verb which means to follow out to the end. And it's the same word that occurred in 2 Peter 1 and 2 Peter 2 and 2. It's the it's the same word. He's consistent all the way through on his writing here. Other comments about that verse?
You know, that, it talks about them doing this for greed. You know, they're greedy, they wanted the wages. Balaam, like I say, he wanted money for doing what he did. That does not imply that you can't teach today and be paid for that.
Correct.
You know, as
A
long as it's
worker is worth his wages.
right, so, a lot of people will think that the preacher should not be paid. You know, this is not what that says. You know, like you say, we've got other scripture that says that, you know, that.
Right.
That there were their wages. So, but this was the wages of unrighteousness.
Right.
They did it out of false pretenses, out of greed.
And there's passages that talks about filthy lucre. That's what we're talking about here, is kind of filthy lucre. You're getting paid for something that you shouldn't have been doing.
Now, I've heard people say that some people preach when they can't do anything else. They preach because they gotta make a living. They gotta earn the money. I don't know about that. Most preachers do it because they wanna teach the truth.
Right.
But,
But you know, you think about though, if that's all they can do and they're doing it right. You know, I mean, there's some people that, you know, everybody has skills, and if that's their only skill, and they're doing it and they're following the gospel and they're preaching the truth, okay, there's no problem with that. Yeah, that's a good word. You know.
I've always thought this, and hope nobody takes this wrong, but if I was in it for the money, I'm in the wrong church.
Well, you know, I think that if you look at the pay that Church of Christ preachers get in comparison to a lot of the denominations, we don't pay our preachers as much as a lot of these other denominations do. And, you know, a lot of them have pension plans, you know, all that kind of stuff, and, you know, that lures people sometimes. And, you know, I preached 25 years, I get a pension, you know, and, you know, that's I get where you're coming from.
There was actually an article this week in the Christian Chronicle, which is a Church of Christ magazine, and it talked about how retiring Church of Christ preachers struggle after they retire.
And you know, and that's on us. It really is. That's on us for not supporting preachers like that. I mean, you know, there's nowadays especially, and I've thought about this a lot, you know, that, you know, with 401ks and things like that, you know, that you could contribute to, and something they could take with them as they move around. So.
and we went to, Free Garden, being kept, we did a few years ago. We went to a financial workshop down there. That guy said that they expressed to the upcoming preachers, you know, what to ask for, about your money, about your retirement, about your 401ks. And then someone said, what about all these congregations that's got 35 people in it? And the guy didn't know what the answer was. You know,
Well, I mean-
they can't do that, you know.
But you know, if there's ways that you could work stuff like that out, even with small congregations. So that if you come in from a congregation that, you know, had some resources to a small one, you still got those resources. It's building a little bit, and you know they can maybe contribute a little bit to it. And I mean, there's probably ways to do it.
Then you got how Macedonia and Jerusalem kind of work together.
Mhm.
You know, one couldn't afford what they were doing, so hey, we'll help you guys out.
Right.
Sadly, that doesn't happen as much as it should, but one way of doing it.
That's right. All right, we'll get off the finances here. Let's get back onto the thing here. All right, so let's look at verse 16. But he was rebuked for his own transgression. A dumb ass spoke with man's voice and stayed the madness of the prophet. So Balaam's transgression was in his readiness to go and curse Israel despite the solemn warning that he had received from God. And the ass here, or the beast of burden, is what we're talking about here. And actually it was an angel who hindered Balaam on his way, and the clear vision of the beast resulted in the first delay, and the miracle was followed when the beast of burden spoke with the voice of a man and brought to his attention the perverseness of the things that he was doing. So it's significant here that Peter accepted and adopted the narrative that was given in Numbers chapter 22 regarding Balaam and the beast of burden as being authentic. You know, this was a acknowledgement of the truth of the things that were written in the Old Testament, and an example of how that there are things in the Old Testament that, even though the Old Testament is not binding on us today, there are still things in there and things that happened and how it was handled that can be, you know, we can learn from today. So it was to him no imaginary incident, and it wasn't a fictitious account. You know, by revelation to Peter from God, you know, he was just confirming this particular incident was something that actually happened, and it wasn't some fable or something that somebody made up. Now, a lot of the modern scholars, in seeking to eliminate this supernatural from the scriptures entirely, they allege that Balaam merely heard the promptings of an uneasy conscience on his occasion, and the beast didn't really speak. You know, and that's typical of the things that go on nowadays. You know, there's people that their whole life is consumed with trying to prove that the things of the Bible are not true. And you know, the longer things go, you know, the more you can see and the more proof that we get of you know, the Bible being true. There was an article, I don't know, a week or so ago, that they were doing some digs over in the Middle East, and they found an Assyrian camp that had been completely destroyed. It was a military base, and you know, they were referencing to the Old Testament. That it just proves that what was said in the Old Testament, all this stuff that they found matched up perfectly with the account that was in the Old Testament. And I mean, this is 2024, and we're still proving the things that a lot of the things in the Old Testament were absolutely true, despite what people think and try to run it down.
Now, the Balaam story is amazing because there are multiple instances of God's interjecting himself, because there are four different times when God put words in Balaam's mouth to answer the Moabites. Remember, it was the Moabites who sent for him to curse
Right.
the children of Israel, because they knew if we came to a war, we couldn't fight them, there are too many of them. So he said, we'll curse them. Now, and God kept through the mouth of Balaam say, I can't curse them. They're mine.
And there's a lot of writers, that what they're trying to do is these modern scholars are trying to impeach Moses as a historian, and also in the same light, trying to convict Peter as an unreliable writer, because he's quoting this stuff that's out there that's fabled. Well, it's not fabled. It's true, and Peter is just reinforcing that. Comments about that verse. All right, let's look at verse 17. These are springs without water and mist driven by a storm, for whom the blackness of darkness hath been reversed. So the apostle in this verse and the preceding one has described the sins of false teachers about whom he writes, and he directs attention to the emptiness and the worthlessness of the things that they are teaching. And though they were paraded around in the guise of teachers of truth, they were really springs without water. What good is a spring that doesn't have any water in it? If you're thirsty and you go to where you think there's a spring, and there's no spring, and there's no water in that spring, it's basically worthless. You're still going to be thirsty, even though you're there at the spring. And you think about it, you've walked all this way to get to this spring, you're going to be disappointed. And there's going to be a lot of disappointment in the judgment from these people that think they're following the right thing and doing the right thing, and they find out that they've been fed a bill of goods. And there's going to be a lot of disappointment because there ain't no water there in this case. So these teachers, they're making these great promises, but these promises are not materializing, and they're not going to materialize because they're not of God. They're like a mist driven by a storm containing the promise of rain, but it just kind of blows by quickly over the land. We get that every now and then. We'll get a little sprinkle that lasts about 2 minutes. You'll think, well, we're going to get a big storm. The storm doesn't come. It's the same type of situation that, that they're running into. So this is a characteristic of these people. They're offering a blessing, but they're deceiving the people, and the people are going to be disappointed because they're going to figure out that they were duped. And it's going to be blackness and darkness that it's going to be reserved for them, and that's what awaits them in the judgment. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 18. For uttering great swelling words of vanity, they entice the lust of the flesh. By lasciviousness, those who are just escaping them from that which live in error. So in this verse which precedes, Peter describes false teachers of whom he writes in figures. Here we are informed why they are waterless springs and rainless mist, that all they say is vanity. Vanity in the original text is used here to signify an emptiness and uselessness and something that's done in vain. They're using great swelling words, pompous, sounds good, that type of thing, but really there's nothing there. It's just words that are made up. It sounds good, but the words have no substance and no meaning. And their purpose is to entice the lusts of the flesh by deceiving these people. And the word lasciviousness that's used here is a plural. And there is no temptation of nature that these teachers didn't offer. They were going to do everything they possibly could to self-gratify and to achieve the goal that they wanted to obtain.
Lustful desire.
Right.
And you notice in the wording here, who were the main targets? The immature Christians, the young Christians.
Right. So their motive was to allure and to lead astray. Their method of enticement was by high-sounding words. The sphere in which the enticement was accomplished was in the lust of the flesh. And the bait, which we talked about before, was the dangling before them was this gross fleshly indulgence of the things that they were doing. So the victims of these false teachers were the ones who were, going to not be able to escape from the darkness of the things that they were teaching. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 19. Promising them liberty while they themselves are bondservants of corruption, for of whom a man is overcome, of the same is he also brought into bondage. So these great swelling words which these teachers were accustomed to speak included an offer of liberty, and it was a feature of their characteristic of their teaching. They were saying the things that people wanted to hear, and it sounded like they were doing the right thing. But the freedom in which the Christian enjoys from bondage of the law, they interpreted and included the privilege of unrestrained indulgence, kind of like what Luke was talking about. Once saved, always saved. You could just go out there and do whatever you wanted to do. And that's kind of they maybe were teaching Calvinism then, even before old John Calvin came up with it.
Slaves to falsehood.
Yeah. All right, let's look at verse 20. Well, I tell you what, we'll quit here. We'll stop at 20. Yeah, nice round number. So Bill will take over next week. Appreciate everybody's attention and comments today.